So, hello and welcome back. We are back with Jules Verne, who is going around the world in 80 days. And, I don't know when this one was written in like relation to the other two Jules Vernes that we've read, but I feel like it's missing, at least so far, some of the humor from the other two. And maybe that's going to change. I am enjoying it, but I think for me, so far, and granted, we aren't very far into it, but so far, I'm not getting all of the crazy Doctor Who vibes that I got from like Journey to the Center of the Earth. And maybe not as many of the grand adventure vibes as we did from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm enjoying it, but it feels like an earlier book to me. I don't know if that's true or not, but we're going to move on and keep on reading. I am enjoying it though. I am also kind of afraid that we're going to be getting into some of the more problematic slash racist stuff now that we are heading into India and potentially Africa. So we're going to gingerly move around those. It was a different time. That doesn't excuse it, but it was a different time. Anyway, we're going to jump in and we're going to, as always, read one, perhaps two chapters. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how my voice goes. I think it's getting better. I don't feel as nasally, knock on wood. And yeah, we're going to start though with chapter 10 of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. And chapter 10 is titled, In Which Passepartout is Only Too Glad to Get Off with the Loss of His Shoes. Let's get into it. Everybody knows that the great reverse triangle land, with its base in the north and its apex in the south, which is called India, embraces 1,400,000 square miles, upon which is spread unequally a population of 180 millions of souls. The British Crown exercises a real and despotic dominion over the larger portion of this vast country and has a Governor-General stationed in Calcutta, governors at Madras, Bombay, and in Bengal, and a lieutenant governor in Agra. But British India, properly so called, only embraces 700,000 square miles and a population from 100 to 110 millions of inhabitants. A considerable portion of India is still free of British authority, and there are certain ferocious Rajas in the interior who are absolutely independent. The celebrated East India Company was an all-powerful company from 1756, when the English first gained a foothold on the spot where now stands the city of Madras, down to the time of the great Sepoy insurrection. It gradually annexed province after province, purchasing them from the native chiefs, who it rarely paid, and appointed the governor general and his subordinates, civil and military. But the East India Company has now passed away, leaving the British possessions in India directly under the control of the crown. The aspect of the country, as well as the manners and distinctions of race, is daily changing. Formerly, one was obliged to travel in India by the old cumbrous methods of going on foot or horseback, in palanquins or unwieldy coaches. Now fast steamboats ply on the Indus and the Ganges, and a great railway with branch lines joining the main line at many points on its route traverses the peninsula from Bombay to Calcutta in 3 days. This railway does not run in a direct line across India. The distance between Bombay and Calcutta, as the bird flies, is only from 1,000 to 1,100 miles, but the deflections of the road increase this distance by more than a third. The general route of the Great Indian Peninsula Railway is as follows. Leaving Bombay, it passes through Skalkat, crossing to the continent opposite Tanna, goes over the chain of the Western Ghats, runs thence northeast as far as Bumfor, skirts the nearly independent territory of Bukaland, ascends Abdalad, turns thence eastward, meeting the Ganges at Barenz, and then departs from the river a little, and descending southeastward by Barivadan and the French town of Chandragore, has its terminus at Calcutta. And massive apologies for my butchering of all of those pronunciations. The passengers of the Mongolia went ashore at 4:30 p.m. At exactly 8, the train was to start for Calcutta. Mr. Fogg, after saying farewell to his whist partners, left the steamer, gave his servant several errands to do, urged it upon him to be at the station promptly at 8, and with his regular step, which beat to the second like an astronomical clock, directed his steps to the passport office. As to the wonders of Bombay, its famous city hall, its splendid library, its forts and docks and bazaars, mosques, synagogues, the Armenian churches, and the noble pagoda on Malabar Hill with its 2 polyagonal towers, he cared not a bit to see them. He would not deign to examine even the masterpieces of Elephantata or the mysterious hypogea concealed southeast from the docks, or the fine remains of Buddhist architecture, the Canarian grottos of the island of Salket. Sounds like a boring person. Having transacted his business at the passport office, Phileas Fogg repaired quietly to the railway station, where he ordered dinner. Among the dishes served up to him, the landlord especially recommended a certain giblet of native rabbit, upon which he prided himself. Mr. Fogg accordingly tasted the dish, but despite its spicy sauce, found it far from palatable. He rang for the landlord, and on his appearance said, fixing his clear eyes upon him, "Is this rabbit, sir?" "Yes, my lord," said the rogue boldly. "Rabbit from the jungles." "And did this rabbit not mew when it was killed?" "Mew, my lord? What? A rabbit mew? I swear to you." "Be so good, sir, as not to swear. But remember this. Cats were formerly considered in India as sacred animals. That was a good time." "For the cats, my lord?" "Probably for travelers as well." After which Mr. Fogg quietly continued his dinner. Fix had gone on shore shortly after Mr. Fogg, and his first destination was the headquarters of the Bombay police. He made himself known as a London detective, said his business in Bombay and the position of affairs relative to this supposed robber, and nervously asked if a warrant had arrived from London. It had not reached the office. Indeed, there had not yet been time for it to even arrive. Fix was disappointed, and tried to obtain an order of arrest from the director of the Bombay police. But the director refused, as the matter concerned the London office, which alone could legally deliver this warrant. Fix did not insist, and was fain to resign himself to await the arrival of the important document, but he was determined not to lose sight of the mysterious rogue as long as he stayed in Bombay. He did not doubt for a moment, any more than Passepartout, that Phileas Fogg was going to stay there, at least until it was time for the warrant to arrive. Passepartout, however, had no sooner heard his master's orders on leaving the Mongolia than he saw at once that they were to leave Bombay as they had done Suez and Paris, and that the journey would be extended at least as far as Calcutta, and maybe even beyond. He began to ask himself if this bet that Mr. Fogg talked about was not really in good earnest, and whether his fate was not in truth forcing him, despite his love of repose, around the entire world in 80 days. Having purchased the usual quota of shirts and shoes, he took a leisurely walk around the streets where crowds of people of many nationalities, Europeans, Persians, Banyans, Sindays, Paris, long-robed Armenians were all collected. It happened to be the day of a Parsi festival. These descendants of the sect of Zoroaster, the most thrifty, civilized, intelligent, and austere of the East Indians, among whom are counted the richest native merchants in Bombay, were celebrating some sort of religious carnival with processions and shows, in the midst of which dancing girls clothed in rose-colored gauze, looped up with gold and silver, were dancing airily, but with perfect modesty, to the sound of viols and the clang of tambourines. Needless to say, Passepartout watched these curious ceremonies with staring eyes and gaping mouth, and that his face was that of the greenest booby in the world. Unhappily for his master, as well as for himself, this curiosity drew him unconsciously further off than he intended. At last, having seen the Parsi carnival wind away into the distance, he was turning his steps to the station when he happened to espy the splendid pagoda on Malabar Hill, and he was seized with an irresistible desire to see inside. He was quite ignorant that it is forbidden to Christians to enter certain Indian temples, and that even the faithful must not go in without first leaving their shoes outside the door. It may be said here that the wise policy of the British government severely punishes a disregard of the practices of the native religions. Passepartout, though, thinking no harm, went in like a simple tourist and was soon lost in admiration of the splendid Brahmin ornamentation which everywhere met his eyes, when all of a sudden he found himself sprawling on the sacred floor. He looked up to behold 3 enraged priests who fell upon him, tore off his shoes, and began to beat him with loud exclamations. The agile Frenchman was soon upon his feet again, and he lost no time in knocking down 2 of his adversaries with his fists and a vigorous application of his toes, and then rushing out of the pagoda as fast as his legs could carry him, he soon escaped the 3rd priest by mingling with the crowd in the streets. At 5 minutes before 8, Passepartout, hatless, shoeless, and having in the squabble lost his package of shirts and shoes, rushed to the station. Fix, who had followed Mr. Fogg to the station and saw that he really was going to leave Bombay, was there on the platform. Fix had resolved to follow the supposed robber to Calcutta, and even farther if necessary. Passepartout did not see the detective, who was standing in a corner, but Fix heard him relate his adventures to Mr. Fogg. "I trust that this will not happen again," said Phileas Fogg as he got onto the train. Poor Passepartout, quite crestfallen, followed his master without a word. Fix was on the point of entering a different carriage when an idea struck which induced him to alter his plans. "No, I'll stay," he muttered. "An offense has been committed on Indian soil. I've got my man." Just then the locomotive gave a sharp screech, and the train headed off into the night. And that is the end of chapter 10. We are going to do another chapter, but as always, I'm going to go grab a drink, and I will see you back in just a minute. That's better. All right, well, that was a chapter. It doesn't paint the British government in very good light, which I think is probably justified. So I guess that's where we'll leave that and move on to chapter 11, which is titled in which Phileas Fogg secures a curious means of conveyance at a fabulous price. The train had started punctually. Among the passengers were a number of officers, government officials, and opium and indigo merchants whose business called them to the East Coast. Passepartout rode in the same carriage as his master, and a third passenger occupied the seat opposite to them. This was Sir Francis Cormatry, one of Mr. Fogg's whist partners on the Mongolia, now on his way to join his corps at Bernay. Sir Francis was a tall man, around 50, who had greatly distinguished himself in the last Sepoy revolt. He made India his home, only making brief trips to England at rare intervals, and was almost as familiar as a native with the customs, history, and character of India and its people. But Phileas Fogg, who was not traveling, only describing a circumference, took no pains to inquire into these subjects. He was a solid body, traversing an orbit around the terrestrial globe according to the laws of rational mechanics. He was at this moment calculating in his mind the number of hours spent since his departure from London, and had it been in his nature to make a useless demonstration, would have rubbed his hands in satisfaction. Sir Francis had observed the oddity of his traveling companion, although the only opportunity he had had for studying him had been while he was dealing cards and between the two rubbers, and he questioned to himself whether a human heart actually beat beneath the cold exterior, and whether Phileas Fogg had any sense of the beauty of nature. The brigadier general was free to mentally confess that of all the eccentric people he had ever met, no one was comparable to this product of exact science. Phileas Fogg had not concealed from Sir Francis his design of going round the world, nor the circumstances under which he set out, and the general only saw in the wager a useless eccentricity and a lack of sound common sense. In the way this strange gentleman was going on, he was going to leave the world without having done any good for himself or anyone else. An hour after leaving Bombay, the train had passed the viaducts and the island of Salket and had gotten into the open country. At Kalyan, they reached the junction of the branch line which descends towards the southeastern India by Kaldala and Pune, and passing Palwel, they entered the defiles of the mountains with the basalt bases and their summits crowned with thick verdant forests. Phileas Fogg and Sir Francis exchanged a few words from time to time, and now Sir Francis, reviving the conversation, said, "Some years ago, Mr. Fogg, you would have met with a delay at this point, which probably would have lost you your wager." "Oh, how so, Sir Francis?" "Because the railway stopped at the base of these mountains, which the passengers were obliged to cross on planquins or ponies to Kadala, on the other side." "Such a delay would not have deranged my plans in the very least," said Mr. Fogg. "I have constantly foreseen the likelihood of obstacles." "But, Mr. Fogg," said Sir Francis, "you run the risk of having some difficulty about this worthy fellow's adventure at the pagoda." Passepartout, his feet comfortably wrapped in a traveling blanket, was sound asleep, and did not dream that anyone was talking about him. "The government is very severe upon that kind of offense. It takes particular care that the religious customs of the people should be respected, and if your servant had been caught—" "Very well, Sir Francis," said Mr. Fogg. "If he had been caught, he would have been condemned and punished, and then would have quietly gone back to Europe. I don't see how this affair would have delayed me." The conversation fell off again. During the night, the train left the mountains behind and passed Nasik, and the next day proceeded over the flat, well cultivated country of Kandesh, with its straggling villages above which rose the minarets of pagodas. This fertile territory is watered by numerous small rivers and limpid streams, mostly tributaries of the Godavari. Passepartout, waking and looking out, could not realize that he was actually crossing India on a railway train. The locomotive, guided by an English engineer and fed with English coal, threw out its smoke upon cotton, coffee, nutmeg, clove, and pepper plantations, while the steam curled in spirals around groups of palm trees, in the midst of which were seen picturesque bungalows, vihairas, a sort of abandoned monastery, and marvelous temples enriched by the exhaustless ornamentation of Indian architecture. Then they came upon vast tracts that extended to the horizon, with jungles inhabited by snakes and tigers, which all fled at the sound of the train, which were succeeded by forests penetrated by the railway and still haunted by elephants, which, with pensive eyes, watched the train as it passed. The travelers crossed, beyond Magellan, the fatal country so often stained with blood by the sectaries of the goddess Kali. Not far off rose Aloria, with its graceful pagodas, and the famous Aurungabad, capital of the ferocious Aurangzeb, now the chief town of one of the detached provinces of the kingdom of Nazim. It was thereabouts that Ferengi, the Thuggee chief, the king of the stranglers, held sway. These ruffians, united by a secret bond, strangled victims of every age in honor of the goddess Death without ever shedding blood. There was a period when this part of the country could scarcely be traveled over without corpses being found everywhere. The English government had succeeded in greatly diminishing these murders, though the Thuggees still exist and pursue the exercise of their rights. At 12:30, the train stopped at Bumfor, where Passepartout was able to purchase some Indian slippers ornamented with pearls, in which, with evident vanity, he proceeded to encase his feet. The travelers made a quick breakfast and started off for Asagur, after skirting for a little bit the banks of the small river Tapti, which empties into the Gulf of Cambrai near Surat. Passepartout was now plunged into an absorbing reverie. Upon his arrival at Bombay, he had entertained hopes that their journey would end there, but now that they were plainly whirling across India at full speed, a sudden change had come over his dreams. His old vagabond nature returned to him. The fantastic ideas of his youth once more took possession of him. He came to regard his master's project as intended in good earnest, and believed in the reality of the bet, and therefore in the tour of the world, and the necessity of making it without fail within the designated 80 days. Already, Passepartout began to worry about possible delays and accidents that could happen along the way. He recognized himself as being personally interested in the wager, and he trembled at the thought that he might have been the means of losing it by his unpardonable folly of the night before. Being far less cool-headed than Mr. Fogg, he was much more restless, counting and recounting the days passed over, uttering maledictions whenever the train stopped, and accusing the train of sluggishness, and mentally blaming Mr. Fogg for not having bribed the engineer. This worthy fellow was ignorant that, while it was possible by such means to hasten the rate of a steamer, it didn't work on a railway. The train entered the defiles of the Sutpur Mountains, which separate Khandesh from Bukulkund, towards the evening. The next day, Sir Francis asked Passepartout what time it was, to which, upon consulting his watch, he replied that it was 3 in the morning. This famous timepiece, always relegated to the Greenwich meridian, was now some 77 degrees westward, and at least 4 hours slow. Sir Francis corrected Passepartout's time, whereupon Passepartout made the same remark that he had said to Fix, and upon the general insisting that the watch should be regulated in each new meridian, since he was constantly heading east, that is, in the face of the sun, and therefore the days were shorter by 4 minutes for each degree going over, but Passepartout obstinately refused to alter his watch, which he kept on London time. It was an innocent delusion. It could harm no one. The train stopped at 8 o'clock in the midst of a glade some 15 miles beyond Rothal, where there were several bungalows and workmen's cabins. The conductor, passing along the carriages, shouted, "Passengers will get out here." Phileas Fogg looked at Sir Francis for an explanation, but the general could not tell what it meant to have a halt in the middle of the forest of dates and acacias. Passepartout, no less surprised, rushed out and speedily returned, crying, "Monsieur, no more railway." "What do you mean?" said Sir Francis. "I mean to say the train is not going on." The general quickly stepped out, while Phileas Fogg calmly followed him, and they proceeded together to the conductor. "Where are we?" said Sir Francis. "At the hamlet of Colby." "Are we stopping here?" "Well, of course. The railway's not finished." "What?" "No, there is still a matter of 50 miles to be laid from here to Allahabad, where the line begins again." "But the papers announced the opening of the railway all the way." "What would you say? The papers were obviously mistaken." "But you sell tickets from Bombay to Calcutta," said Sir Francis, who was growing angry. "No doubt," said the conductor, "but the passengers know that they must provide means of transportation for themselves from Colby to Allahabad." Sir Francis was furious. Passepartout would willingly have knocked the conductor down, but he did not dare look at his master. "Sir Francis," said Mr. Fogg quietly, "we will, if you please, look around for some means of conveyance to Allahabad." "Mr. Fogg, this is a delay greatly to your disadvantage." No, it was foreseen." "What? You knew—" "No, but I knew that some obstacle or other would sooner or later arise along my route. Nothing, therefore, is lost. I have 2 days, which I have already gained, to sacrifice. A steamer leaves Calcutta for Hong Kong at noon on the 25th. Today is the 22nd, and we will reach Calcutta in time." There was nothing anyone could say to such a confident response. It was too true that the railway came to a termination at this point. The papers were like some watches, which have a way of getting too fast, and had been premature in their announcement of the completion of the line. The greater part of the travelers were aware of this interruption, and leaving the train, they began to engage such vehicles as the village could provide. 4-wheeled palkiheiries, wagons drawn by zebus, carriages that looked like perambulating pagodas, palanquins, ponies, and whatnot. Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis, after searching the village from end to end, came back without having found a thing. "I'll go afoot," said Phileas Fogg. Passepartout, who had now rejoined his master, made a grimace as he thought of his magnificent but all too flimsy shoes. Happily, he too had been looking around, and after a moment's hesitation said, "Monsieur, I think I have found a means of conveyance." "What?" "An elephant. An elephant that belongs to a person who lives but 100 steps from here." "Let's go and see the elephant," said Mr. Fogg. They soon reached a small hut, near which, enclosed within some high pilings, was the animal in question. A man came out of the hut, and at their request conducted them into the enclosure. The elephant, which its owner had raised not as a beast of burden, but for war, was only half domesticated. The man had begun already by often irritating him and feeding him every 3 months on sugar and butter to impart upon him a ferocity not in his nature. This method being often employed by those who train elephants for battle. Happily, however, for Mr. Fogg, the animal's instruction in this direction had not gone too far, and the elephant still preserved its natural gentleness. Keone, this was the name of the beast, could doubtless go rapidly for a long time, and in default of any other means of conveyance, Mr. Fogg resolved to hire him. But elephants are far from cheap in India, where they are becoming scarce. The males, who alone are suitable for circus shows, are much sought, especially, but as few of them are domesticated. When, therefore, Mr. Fogg proposed to the man to hire Keone, he was refused point blank. Mr. Fogg persisted, offering the excessive sum of £10 an hour for the loan of the beast to Allahabad. Refused. £20? Also refused. £40? Still refused. Passepartout jumped at each advance, but the man refused to be tempted. But the offer was an alluring one, for supposing it took the elephant 15 hours to reach Allahabad, its owner would receive no less than £600. Phileas Fogg, without getting in the least flurried, then proposed to purchase the animal outright, and at first offered £1,000 for him. The man, perhaps thinking he was going to make a great bargain, yet again refused. Sir Francis took Mr. Fogg aside and begged him to think before he went any further, to which Mr. Fogg said that he was not in the habit of acting rashly, that a bet of £20,000 was at stake, and that the elephant was absolutely necessary to him, and that he would secure him if he had to pay 20 times his value. Returning to the man, whose small, sharp eyes, glistening, betrayed that with him it was only a question of how high the price would go, Mr. Fogg offered first £1,200, then £1,500, then £1,800, then £2,000. Passepartout, usually so flushed, was dead white with suspense. Finally, at £2,000, the man yielded. "What a price, great heaven!" cried Passepartout, "for an elephant!" All that remained now was to find a guide, which was comparatively easy. A young Parsee with an intelligent face offered his services, which Mr. Fogg accepted, promising so generous a reward as to materially stimulate the boy's zeal. The elephant was led out and equipped. The Parsee, who was an accomplished elephant driver, covered his back with a sort of saddlecloth and attached to each of his flanks some curiously uncomfortable howdahs. Phileas paid the Indian with some banknotes, which he extracted from his famous carpet bag, a proceeding that seemed to deprive poor Passepartout of all of his vitals. Then he offered to carry Sir Francis to Allahabad with him, which the brigadier general gratefully accepted, as one traveler the more would not be likely to fatigue the giant elephant. They purchased provisions at Colby, while Sir Francis and Mr. Fogg took the howdahs on either side. Passepartout got astride the saddlecloth in between them, and the Parsee perched himself on the elephant's neck, and at 9 o'clock they set out from the village, the animal marching off through the dense forest of palm trees by the shortest way possible. And that was the end of chapter 11. I'm not really sure what a howdah is. I think it's the little houses that are on the sides, and I only know that because of World of Warcraft, and I don't think they're called howdahs, though. Interesting. I don't know that I would want to travel 12 hours on the back of an elephant. Also, the sun is coming right there. We go. If I scooch this way, it's not in my eyes. The perils of reading at this time of day, but you know what? It's also very welcome because they are calling for snow this weekend, and I'm not ready. I managed to get the garden mostly put away. I got several other things down. I got the tall grass that is in an area that will be shoveled, all cut down, and all of the big sticks out of the driveway. So if I do have to shovel, I won't be hitting sticks, which is always a pain in the butt. But other than that, I'm really not ready. I do think I am going to go for a walk, and if I do, I will take you guys with me because I feel like it's been a very long time since I've taken you out for a walk, which is mostly because I've been sick. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed those 2 chapters. As always, I should be streaming tomorrow night, so if you would like to join me, I don't know what we'll be doing. We might just be playing World of Warcraft. I've been kind of deep in the Legion remix, and maybe I'll start a new character. It's always fun. We could zip through all the Legion content. Or we could play Phasmo, or I could build something in The Sims. Who knows? I'll figure it out when the time comes. But thank you, as always, for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed those 2 chapters, and I will see you on Monday.